the process where art inspires life, life inspires art, for me has always been put it into a song. Put it into a song. Put it into a song. If I really, really want to talk about it, if I really, really want to preserve it in the amber of time,
Love that.
put it into a song.
Welcome to the Be Here Now guest podcast. This series features a collection of teachings and conversations centered around mindfulness, spiritual growth, and living a life in balance. Each week, our diverse network of guest teachers and hosts offer up wisdom and practices from a different spiritual path and perspective. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/donate.
Welcome to the Ram Dass Fellowship live stream. It's great to come together with people from around the world to deepen into these teachings of Ram Dass and Neem Karoli Baba with incredible and brilliant wisdom keepers of our time. I'm Jackie Dobrinska. I'm the Community Outreach and Education Director for Love Serve Remember Foundation. And you are the Ram Dass Satsang, the community, whether you have been here for 5 days or 50 years. This is our spiritual community coming together. You know, in Buddhism, they talk about satsang or community being the most important of the triple gems. And in these times, it feels even more important in some ways. The spiritual community is the place that we can go to feed our hearts and souls in a lot of ways. It's a place we can go to remember truths and practices, which are really easy to forget. We come together and we share experiences and inspiration and curiosities and wisdom. And it reminds us and each other of that loving awareness that is our true nature. So that's one of the purposes behind these live streams, is to learn from each other and from these great wisdom keepers. So before we begin tonight, just a few things about how we're about to proceed. So our topic is Resonance, Integration, and Catharsis with John Forté. And I'm really excited to unpack that title. We're going to spend about 75 minutes together. The first half, give or take, John's going to share some stories with us. And the second half will be me asking your questions. And you can ask your questions at any time. Just type in the chat wherever you are watching from. And the beloved Gina and JR are on the back end, and they'll be sending us your questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So I invite you each to settle into your space and just to recognize the many hearts and souls that are connected through time and space as we come together to be in this satsang together. And so from that space, we will welcome John Forté, who has a long history with Ram Dass and his teachings. Many of you may know him from his recent incredible and transcendent new album, Vessels, Angels, and Ancestors, which was released with Soul Land Records a few months ago. And if you don't know this brilliant album, we'll start in a few minutes with one of the tracks. John is a Grammy-nominated recording artist. He's first known for his work with the Fugees. He wrote and produced songs from their 1996 multiple platinum album, The Score. He's also an activist, filmmaker, and writer. And his lived experience and that activism go hand in hand. He gives unyielding support to criminal justice reform initiatives that are rooted in ending mass incarceration and systematic injustices. He's performed at the White House numerous times during the Obama administration and has contributed his voice and music to Time Done, the Schools Not Prisons tour, Vote for Justice, and most recently, California's For Safety and Justice's Progress Not Prison campaign. So albums and films and soundtracks and fashion shows to the Brooklyn Nets theme song and creative direction for cannabis brands, scores for broadcast television, and much more. John's art has always complemented powerful and impactful storytelling. So let us all shine some energy and light as we welcome John to the fellowship to tell us stories and talk about resonance, integration, and catharsis. So welcome, John. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks for having me. Thank you to the fellowship for having me this evening. I hope that I'm transmitting loud and clear, and I hope all's well. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Good. So I'd love for you to start by just sort of unpacking that title for us, Resonance, Integration, and Catharsis.
Resonance, integration, and catharsis. I think that it sounds a lot more complex potentially than it is. What I'm attempting to unpack is the process, how the wisdom and the teaching of Ram Dass in particular surrounded me, and how I encountered it. So I think that, like all things, time, Einstein said that the only reason that time exists is so that everything doesn't happen at once. And so, through lived experience, we have the opportunity to have this accordion unfolding of experience, of breadth and depth. And, in my younger years, when I was, fresh out of the gate and on top of the world, and experiencing life in that way, that was a trip in and of itself. And it was a ride. It was everything that the bio, I think, is supposed to hint to, the sizzle and the salaciousness of impact and of community. And especially when you're talking about being a creative and then having the opportunity to sing songs and for folks to gather together in very, very large numbers, that's special. It's special to be up on that stage. It's special to be in the audience. It's special to be present, to partake in that. And so, during those years of me getting tuned in and turned on to life outside of reality as I knew it, being a kid from Brownsville, Brooklyn, and then going to boarding school in New Hampshire for 4 years, and then coming back to New York City. I didn't get on my first plane until I was 16. So I was a late bloomer, at least in my own mind, for seeing what was out there. But rest assured, when I think when that opportunity, or when the opportunities presented themselves for me to see more and do more, that happened in an electrifying way until until it all came crashing down, until my first failure, until my first taste of the underside of success, or at least success as I envisioned it. And it didn't happen overnight. Like all things, again, there's a process to go from that opening line of the bio to being, a Grammy-nominated producer or recording artist, to then looking at a sheet of paper that says, the United States of America versus John Forté, finding myself involved in a criminal enterprise, and the House of Cards having fallen, and looking at a very, very uncertain, bleak future. And, in 2001, in a federal courthouse in Houston, Texas, I was found guilty of possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance. And I was sentenced to 14 years in a federal prison. And, it was categorized as a first-time nonviolent offense, with, pretty harsh consequences, 168 months in prison, 14 years in prison. And that was, like I said, 2001. That was autumn of 2001, 6 days before 9/11. I was in a cell in Houston, Texas, when 9/11 happened, almost 22 years ago. And it was during that time in prison when I was, the opportunity to grow never stops. The opportunity to engage never stops, irrespective of location and almost always circumstance. But again, there's a process. So I was first given a copy of Be Here Now when I was in a federal prison in Loretto, which is Western Pennsylvania. And that was when I read Be Here Now. And I'll go back to the title, resonance. There's resonance and reception. You can be privy to something without necessarily absorbing it or soaking it in. And so I'm relatively certain that the first time I read Be Here Now, there was definitely resonance. The reception took some time. It took some time relative to when I, closed that last page to when I wanted to hear his voice. To when I wanted to, see his face. And that actually happened many, many years later. So the seeds were planted, I think, in that first encounter in this iteration. But it had to take its time to germinate, to gestate, to take root. And it wasn't until I was home, many, many years later, in fact, I'd probably say almost a decade later than when I first read Be Here Now, that I returned to what had grown from, call it an interest. Again, that flicker of resonance into something that was more compelling, something that that called me even more. You might even just say a more profound resonance, a magnified resonance. So there are levels to it. And, it's like a sweet melody or the hint of a song for me. Before it becomes something grandiose, it's, in its simplest form, it's that thing you hum. It's that thing that you have in your pocket. It's that thing that you can keep close to your chest. It's simple and it's yours. It's a phrase, be here now. But the lived experience, right? When you really start to get into the grit of what it means, or the power that you possess in owning this nowness, rather than, and I mean, this is something that I relate to when I think about how it feels. The angst of not being able to correct your past and not being in control of what's to come, which is oftentimes exacerbated by, the constructs that are around us that reinforce our ideas of who we are and who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to look like and how we're supposed to sound and all of that within our so-called society. Mm-hmm. Right? That's our contract, right? When a person shows up in a uniform, depending on what that uniform is, well, we know that we need to start assuming roles and responsibilities to engage.
Yeah.
So the process where art inspires life, life inspires art, for me has always been put it into a song. Put it into a song. Put it into a song. If I really, really want to talk about it, if I really, really want to preserve it in the amber of time,
love that.
Put it into a song.
So this is a great segue, because we were going to start with your song Ancestors, but I jumped right into the title. So I'm curious if you would tell us a little bit about what was put into that song, and then we can play that video and come back and keep talking about some of these things.
Yeah. Ancestors is, and I love the fact that we get to begin with Ancestors, because Ancestors is the last song on the new album, Vessels, Angels, and Ancestors. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, it began the album process, because the track itself came from a very, very dear friend of mine, Emil McGloin. I don't know, maybe a year, no, it must be more, a year and a half ago. Emil sent me a few emails. He said, I'm working on some new music. Let me know if anything speaks to you. And the first track that he shared with me was Ancestors. And I said, wow, this is powerful. It was him on guitar, and even though there weren't many tracks, there was a dynamism. There's a movement. There was a story that was already being told before I wrote the first lyric. And Ram Dass his words bookend the experience that is my album, Vessels, Angels, and Ancestors. It begins. We hear him grounding us. The let's call it the intention of the experience, and then by the time we get to Ancestors, he ties it up in this bow of divine love, reminding us of our true selves. And so that's what Ancestors is about.
Love it. JR, would you be willing to play that?
Do believe it's accurate. It's never not happening. The current is all flows on which we are traveling. The wind in my sails is the air in my diaphragm. That which is not love will pale in comparison. Avarice and average men with arrogance. I rub shoulders playing tennis in Greenwich with them. Life is just a game trying to beat 10% of them. Rinse, wash, win again. P7. Good Lord, bless the seedlings and the hands that keep them, the air above them and the lands underneath them. It's not enough to love them. She said, nurture, then you free them. Only those who take advantage ever keep them. Steeped in tradition, the old heads spoke, so we listened. And a few of us remembered what was whispered. Play hard, play fair, play your position. Walk good. Be well, be the difference.
Who you are is beyond time, beyond space, without form, without limit. In truth, there is nowhere where you are, and there is nowhere where you are not. Who you are in truth is invulnerable. You always were, you are, and you always will be. You are the ancient one. There is no name for who you are. Through a quiet mind, an open heart, an honoring of incarnation, a learning how to live on every plane simultaneously, impeccably. Become, know your original face. Rest in love, 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 love.
Those lyrics are amazing. I love the who you are is beyond time, beyond space, without form, without limit, and the resting in so many of it. So thank you. That was lovely to hear. One of the things you were talking about, going from Grammy-nominated artist to seeing that sheet of paper. And I think about John of the Cross and going through a dark night of the soul while being imprisoned. And this idea that there's sort of this collective dark night that is happening for so many people. And that often those dark nights lead us to these deeper places where we get to experience, where we're beyond the way we know ourselves. And so when you talk about resonance, I think there's a lot of people that can resonate with that experience. But there's the integration piece. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the integration piece of that experience.
Yeah. As far as the integration goes, it's what I was talking about in terms of putting it into a song. Mm-hmm. The wisdom of Ram Dass, and I mean there are a handful of others, but we're here to talk about Ram Dass.
Talk about him. We can talk about him.
And so it touched me in such a profound way that I said, how do I now spread the good news, or spread what feels so good to me? Yeah. I don't want to keep this to myself. And that's what the integration component is all about. That's how do I put this into practice that reminds me of the story and the stories that speak to me. Even if I'm not necessarily aware of why there is resonance, mm-hmm. when there is resonance, I've learned that's, I have to pay attention. And, the willingness to integrate any of this profound wisdom into my art, it's me weaving in these other stories that matter into my story. It's a tattoo. It's why I've done this. It's why I do this. But I also know that, what works for me may not work for others. And that, again, what works for others may not work for me. So how do I find that balance, to be able to celebrate the good news, while at the same time knowing that, again, just because it's good for me doesn't mean that it's going to be good for someone else. I don't subscribe to this notion that, that there's this sort of universal one size fits all solution.
Yeah.
I am in the proverbial business of, having extreme compassion for what I'm seeing, bearing witness to, from the inside out, but at the same time realizing that all of that is always contingent upon how I first and foremost feel about myself in the process of the experience. How am I approaching this role as observer? Am I doing it playfully? Am I doing it with a chip on my shoulder? Am I doing it from a place of fear? Am I doing it from a place of love? All of that tints how we're going to share in this space together, how I show up.
Yeah.
And so getting back to the original question, integration. Integration for me reminds me, it's aspirational. Some people might want to aspire for things which are cool because that's part of the experience. But I'd like to put in these pearls of other things, right? Like vibrational aspiration.
Love it. Yeah.
And And there are certain words and phrases and melodies that feel better for me. And at this point in my career, that's the art that I'm called to make. So that's the integration component of it.
I love that. I love that you bring up the like the art as a practice. I think it's really easy for so many of us to get into the idea that practice is like spine straight, you know, some sort of discipline with some rigidity. But this idea, you know, I think of all of the artists that share their paintings on the Ram Dass sites. You as a musician bringing this art, like it comes through in so many ways, and that art being that practice as well, you know, dance being a practice, however that comes through.
Well, you know, to that point, I mean, it's really Zen, right? Like I say on the album, it's never not happening. When I was listening to the album in its entirety from beginning to end with Raghu Marcus, a dear friend and executive director of the foundation, who decided to support this by way of creating Soul Land. You know, I was speaking to Raghu about this, and I said, Raghu, you know, this feels hand in hand with the way of mindful awareness. And he says, yes, it does, but don't forget the love, right? Like it's one thing to have the mindful awareness, to know that, well, here's my in breath, here's my out breath. Well, that is special. That is special, to be so present that you can access that. But what Raghu reminded me in flipping that switch of, you know, don't forget the love. That's the secret sauce here.
Yeah, it really is.
Right? Because I can observe the turmoil, I can observe the suffering, and I can observe the joys, and I observe the triumphs. And I can observe. But if I don't have that observation rooted in love, well, then I lose out on a whole lot of why I chose to participate in this experience this time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that
actually is the sort of natural segue into what happens after the, you know, let's call it successful integration of this wisdom into the art, where I've now fused and paid tribute and had a public conversation in which we held hands, right? That's what this album feels like. It feels like holding hands with Ram Dass walking down the beach. And so with that, even when I'm slumped over and I'm at my, you know, I'm at my worst, that still exists, and that will always exist. But it's the opportunity to be able to lean back into that vibration, back into that experience, as much, as often as I want or need to. But the catharsis, the freedom, the liberation that happens from the experience of the conversation, the experience of the union, the song, the community. We do that again and again and again and again. I don't think by design it's to just have it and to let it fade away and to never see it again. I think that once you've realized you can access it, hold it, manifest it, touch it, feel it, well, then now it's yours to do it again and again and again. Therein, I think, lies the power, the opportunity, the humility.
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm totally hearing this part correct, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But part of what that reminds me of is like we lose it all, like we just lose it, right? And then we have the opportunity to start again. And that's the part Sharon Salzberg talks about. That's the part that's so key, is the starting again, the recognizing. And even when we started this live stream, this idea that we're constantly forgetting, and then we have these touch points to help us remember, whether it is community or these songs. I love how do we hold our vibrational tone, and that, I lose it. I lose the tone. And then the song helps me come back to, oh, I know how to hold this.
Well, that's also, I think to lose it is almost like a misnomer. I don't think that there's sadness in losing. I think that's almost like exhaling, right? Because what happens if you just try to hold in the inhale? Oh, it feels good until you're unconscious, right? So there's the balance of the breath where you have to let it go, and then you have to bring it in. You have to let it go, and you have to bring it in. And that's the dance. And that comes with our wisdom. That comes with us having these gems, having access to them, and then doing something so foolhardy and, oh, how could I? Well, yeah, that's a part of the experience. It's a part of the experience to just forget and to remember and to forget and to remember. Yeah. I think trying to stay here is an exercise in futility. I think the joy is in recognizing, oh, it's beautiful up here, and then I can come down and realize that, well, there's beauty here, or there's the experience to be had here, and then I'm back up. So imagine you imagine being on a trampoline. Yeah. Imagine being up and down on a trampoline, right? It's when you come up, you've got this view, and you've got this and you can see we're in the Hollywood Hills. It's the sun, and every time we're at the apex of the jump, we're seeing the sun, but the sun is going down. And then we get back down, and we're seeing all of our friends down here, and it's cool. But but then we're back up, and it's the beauty of the bounce.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think about that in terms of just like the ups and downs in life, but I also think of it in terms of like the planes of consciousness. We're shifting through planes of consciousness. And one of the things that Ram Dass says that really just comes to me all the time is that we're not meant to be just at one. We're meant to be able to easily move between them. And I love that trampoline image of moving between those states. I'm curious if we could back up just a little bit. You talked about you came to Be Here Now, and it sort of planted some seeds, but they didn't really, they slowly grew in the background, right? And I think so many of us have that experience of like some seeds get planted, and then you fast forward your 10 years, you're like, whoa, how did this happen? How did I come here from there? And so I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit more about that experience for you, how those seeds grew to the point where you were now holding hands, walking down a beach with Ram Dass.
So I encountered, I'll just remind everyone listening, including myself, that I read Be Here Now when I was in a physical prison for the first time. But it wasn't until, many, many years later when when those seeds, sprouted and rooted and blossomed into something that I had to have more on display around me. It's again, thinking about flowers. Think about those flowers that you bring home and you put into a vase. You bring them out of the garden and then you bring them inside the flowers behind you. There was a point in my life when I was not in a physical prison. But I was in a very, very analogous state of not knowing, of despair, of having my faith and very purpose questioned. So when I encountered not just the words, but the vibration that accompanies the words many, many years later, it was like a familiar voice. That's it. It was like a friend calling you. It was like a friend calling someone that you hadn't seen in God knows how long, and it doesn't matter, but you heard their voice and you said, oh, man. Well, and then one thing leads to another and you realize, well, you do have time to have lunch. And then at that lunch, you have a conversation and you realize, well, okay, well, now I do have time after the lunch to keep this conversation going, and you speak more and you can lean more into that relationship. So that's what I wouldn't even call it the reacquaintance, but that was when the uptick in the resonance. That's what it felt like for me. That's when I felt duty bound to honor it by incorporating it into what I do.
And you talked about the integration and incorporating that through the music, but you also do a ton with social justice. And I'm curious if that informed it or how it informs some of the work you do. He talked a lot about, how to help and how to show up with an open heart, all those things.
Well, there's something that's funny that happens with, that awakening in oneself with, an awareness of it's an awareness of your responsibilities. Not just to yourself, but to community. Because what you realize is that whatever I do to myself invariably impacts and affects the community, right? There is no other. So what does that mean? As good as I can feel in doing or being the recipient to wisdom, let's say to knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Life is still transpiring outside of what's happening, in my person, in my household, in my space. So now just to back up just a little bit, we have, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We, doing this work, and this is the real beauty of it, right? Mm-hmm. The more that you work on yourself, the more that work does what it needs to do. Mm-hmm. In ways that we can't begin to, I think, quantify, or, we can try to imagine. That's fun, but I think really, the work begins. The work begins here, but it doesn't stop there. Where it goes from there is, it's anyone's guess. What I do in the realm of criminal justice reform or activism pales in comparison to what some friends of mine who have boots on the ground are doing 23 out of 24 hours of every day. Mm. I am humbled by their efforts, by that sort of commitment to activism. So I do what I can when I can. Yeah. And that has to be enough.
Yeah.
There's no one right way to it. There's no one quick fix solution. Yeah. But it is an exercise so worth doing that I've done it 1,000,000 times.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this, the hero myth, that often we look at so there's all the people dedicating 23 hours, like their incredible work. And then often there's like the person we see who stands up for an issue. And there's the hero myth of like, that's the person that did it. But there's all the people in the background making the flyers and, the phone calls. And there's so many pieces to a movement, and that each of us has a part to play in that. And we often, I think, get so caught in the idea that we have to be the hero that we forget how important all of those other pieces are in every single movement that's ever happened.
I mean, to that point, who's not the hero in the movement?
Yeah, exactly.
Who is not the hero? The person who's making the signs, the person who's handing out the food, the person who's putting the strategies together. Like, everyone in the movement is so heroic. Yeah. And so you look to your left and you see that power and that strength and that energy, that fervor. You look to your right and you see that inspiration, that dedication, that commitment. And we're reminded of our greatness.
Yeah. And to not discount the parts that we play, which is we're all so important. And so that's breaking down that myth, I think, is so key. So for those of you out there watching, you are welcome to put questions into the chat for anything that you have to ask John. And we have one cue from Austin. This might be referring back to a little bit earlier. But Joseph Campbell said that when you follow your bliss, the universe will open doors where before there were only walls. And he asks, what was the process like for you in finding your bliss in creating music?
It's continuous for me. I'll be super candid. The greatest bliss that I've found most recently is, after meeting my children and the ability to honor them and celebrate them and leave messages for them in song. I think it's something that I always did as a thought exercise, but it wasn't, being as believing, a song that I released in 2020, it's a direct ode to my children. And, while there's bliss, there's also, that knowing that parental knowing, right? That you will nurture and you will love so deeply. And that is going to be that's going to be the juju that's going to, that they'll be able to pour into their wounds, that they'll be able to lean on when the world is less compassionate and harsh. But you also realize that in the wars that they will have to fight, that there'll be growth, that there'll be understanding, that there'll be empathy, that there'll be love, that there'll be, their own opportunity to expand. So I think in the question of, again, back to the question of, what is it like to perhaps explore, bliss in the creative process? Bliss, exploring bliss in the creative process doesn't come without exploring pain in the creative process, because they go hand in hand. So I am extremely, extremely grateful for the opportunity to explore bliss, especially at the sides of my children. But that does not come without wrestling with the world that they'll have to know and experience, whether it's a hotter world, whether it's, the theft of, or the continued theft of Black and brown bodies, whether it's the trauma, the continued trauma of a pandemic, whether it's, again, right, like all of these things that exist, that will exist, but they'll have to have, and we will have to have, a North Star, a place to come back to. That does exist as well, and that's what I think I'm trying to do here and now, to breathe as much life into these safe spaces, into these vulnerable spaces, into these honest spaces, as much as I can, because the construct is going to do what the construct is going to do. Yeah. That's the job of the construct. But then, again, everything's not for everyone. So what I'm doing with this stuff is antithetical to that, but I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Who it hits. It reminds me, and I'm going to butcher this quote, so I'm sure there's people out there that can correct me with what it exactly says. But there's this quote that comes to mind of Ram Dass. If it's going to be the apocalypse, my job is to be present and keep my heart open. If it's going to be the enlightenment, my job is to be present and keep my heart open. And it feels like that's part of what you're doing with the music, is just that reminder: be present, keep your heart open. So James asks, and it sort of weaves into what you were talking about, this idea of what is to come and what your kids will inherit. And, how do we deal with fear and loss in our life. He specifically asks, how do you deal with fear and loss in your life? And I think we've talked a lot of some, but I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that specifically.
There's a song on the album. It's the second song on the album. It's called Begin Again. You're talking about that notion. The first line of that song is as follows. In the presence of grace and grief, the sun rose again. We face the east. Take a breath, hold it in, release. We are precisely where we're meant to be. So, in the presence of grace and grief, the sun rose again. We face the east. These things, in the presence of these things happening, so long as the sun rises, and as long as we have the opportunity to see that sun, well, then there's an opportunity there. And there's a reason, dare I say, not only an opportunity, but a reason that there is an opportunity to continue to see that light that exists. So there's that, but then there's also the knowing that that the most infinitesimal particle of eternity is still eternity. And I'm not a scientist, but I do know that I know that we're made of the stuff of the stars, right? So there's this pursuit right now to go far out. I mean, that same pursuit is, going far in.
Yeah.
So the loss, the tragedy, the trauma, that's part of it. And I'm going to tell you a little quote. It's almost like a mantra of mine. When I'm face to face with something that feels like that. Thank God for the 20-degree days that make the 40-degree days feel like 60-degree days.
That's great.
Were it not for those really, really cold days, then those days that are a little bit warmer, oh man, they wouldn't feel like spring. So I sit before you having a lived experience that was not always, roses. It was not always triumph. But I'll say in the wake of my lived experience and in the midst of my lived experience, it just feels so much better now. It just feels so much better from where I sit. Because I can appreciate this exchange so much more now. It's tastier. It's more delicious. It's richer. It's more vibrant. There is more grace here. There is more love here. There is more compassion here. There is more trust here. There is more understanding here. So.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you. A couple of more questions are coming in. Errol asks, what teachings in Be Here Now had the biggest impact on your life and way of thinking?
I can't extract one thing other than, well, I think that it actually comes back to, and I don't know if this was in Be Here Now, but, well, it's the name of the foundation, and it's it's kind of Ram Dass's walking orders, right? To love everyone, to serve everyone, and to remember God. While that might not necessarily be a page out of Be Here Now, it is a direct nexus to that mantra, which is, I must say, which is not my personal mantra, but it is one that I respect as Ram Dass's, his orders. That was, it's what he was told. Like, all right, go back to the West now, and this is what you have to do. Mm-hmm. It's like, again, being given your name and then being given your mission. Mm. Mm. In the story, in Ram Dass's, journey, in his personal story of being given his name and being given his mission, well, I'm reminded of my own story of being given my name and being given my mission. And so I'm constantly reminded. I look to my left, and there's Ram Dass, right? I look to my right, and there's Alan Watts. And so, what are you reading? I'm reading the Bhagavad Gita, and a person over here is reading. Well, that's the joy of it. Yeah. The not knowing can be paralyzing. It can be so scary, right? I'm not trying to take away. I'm not trying to lessen that for anyone, right? Like it can be fucking terrifying. Mm. But and that's what I want to lean into, right? Like I want to lean into the what, but it could also be, I want to lean into what it could also be. And that, it might be a more difficult practice in a time of, but it doesn't make it any less worthwhile or any less inspiring or enlightening or euphoric or humble, all of it. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things. It's like, don't knock it till you try it. Yeah.
I love it. Jacob asks, and I think we've talked about this, but again, if you want to be more drill into it a little bit, how music and spirituality meet. How do you view music and spirituality as something that meets?
Harmoniously, and sometimes dissonance. Mm. Music is the great universal language as far as I've lived it and known it. A sad song, a happy song. Music is and has been the great companion piece for me. And I wanted this album, Vessels, Angels, and Ancestors, to be a companion piece to others in the way that music indefinitely has blessed me. So music and spirituality, they're imbricated into a tightly woven, everlasting fabric.
So we are here, this is the Ram Dass Fellowship. We focus on community. Sue asks about your community, specifically spiritual community. Was it available when you were inside the prison system? And I'm curious about your community, like community in general in your life as well, how that informs you.
Community is everything and has been everything to me long before I knew that. I knew very, very deeply inside that I would have just a richer, a more vibrant, a more qualitative experience collaborating with others. That's definitely been a mission of mine. Looking for my tribe, and I think that in putting the energy and the teachings into song, that's been my way of casting out the message to find my people. And oh man, if you ask me, like, how was I buoyed while I was away? So like I said, I went away in 2001. In 2002, I came out with an album called I, John. So it's the 20th anniversary of I, John. I'd like to re-release that album this year because it's not available. It's not available anywhere. It's available on, if you have a CD, you have it, but it's not, you can find it, some songs on YouTube. But I released that album without being able to promote it because I was in prison. And all throughout, you guys
lost you a little bit. Try
Sorry.
again. Sorry, well, you're back. You're back.
Okay. Am I back now?
Yeah, you sound good.
All right. And so all throughout that experience, I was receiving letters, correspondence from family, friends, and strangers supporting me, but a lot of that support came by way of people who heard the music. Interestingly, I was receiving mail from, and this is 2002. People saying, "Oh, there's a song on your album that my wife and I, we got married to, and we're in Japan." And I was, "You're in Japan? I'm in prison in Texas, and you're in Japan, hearing my music, getting married, writing me a letter." So not only did you, include this music at your wedding, but you took the time afterwards to handwrite me a letter and to put it into an envelope and to put a stamp on it and to actually mail it. So I had a number of instances like that, like I said, they buoyed me. They lifted me right on up. But then they were awesome individuals, men that I now, think of as family, that I met through those years inside. Brilliant men, compassionate men, elegant, dignified men, responsible, anything that, but yes, in that place. So I know in my heart of hearts, community can be found anywhere and everywhere. And especially in what we might think of as the darkest of places during the darkest of times. There might even be an argument to say that that's when your megaphone or the light you shine might be at its brightest, or its greatest amplitude.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of being together in this community satsang event. So grateful that you're here and part of this community and buoying up this community with your music. It's powerful. When you brought up the Bhagavad Gita, and the last thing you said about light and darkness is a theme that sort of runs through the Gita. And I just wanted to mention to everyone to keep an eye out. In a couple of weeks, we're going to be launching a course, Ram Dass talking about the Bhagavad Gita. So it's been really rich to be going through that archival material. So I hope people will check that out. So I just want to give you a really big thank you for showing up, for doing what you do, for sharing your wisdom here this evening. I want to also give a big thank you to the people on the back end for making this happen, Gina and JR, as well as everyone else. And a really big thank you for all the people that showed up to tune into this. These events, most of what we do is free and by donation. So if you want to consider supporting this financially, you can text satsang to 91999 and there'll be a link in your chats as well. And know that you can rewatch this live stream or share it with your friends. So you'll simply go to ramdass.org/livestream-replays, and that link will be in the chats as well. And keep an eye out. We do these every month. We also have meetups where we connect as a community to chat around various themes. And we have some affinity groups as well that you can sign up for where they look at specific topics from a particular perspective. So it's lots of ways to actually have face-to-face connection with people within the community. So anything else coming up for you that you want to share?
Well, you mentioned the Gita, and maybe the one thing I'll share is what I think of when I think of the Bhagavad Gita, and I think of the opening. I think of the opening scene. I think of the beginning of the story, which you and I have spoken about. But it's also, the beginning of that story is something that I think of often and remind myself when I'm going through it, whatever the it is. And it is the fact that everyone is fighting a battle. Every being that you see, that you can bear witness to and that can bear witness to you is going through it in some shape, form, or fashion. And knowing that, you can forget, you may want to give somebody the bird and they cut you off in traffic, but man, to just have that seed planted in you, you'll remember when you'll need to remember.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we're all going through this human experience, and it is not an easy thing to navigate.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
All those inner battles and navigating. So we're all in it together, hopefully. That's where I hope we can move to. So. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's been such a joy getting to chat with you. I just so appreciate how you show up in the world. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you to the fellowship. Thank you to Gina. Thank you to JR. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you all for sitting with us and entertaining us in this conversation and for joining in. It's really awesome.
Yeah. All right. So we will see you all next month. Be well.